A doctor accustomed to prioritizing wealthy patients ignores the pleas of a young, poor pregnant woman desperately seeking his help. The next morning, he finds a baby left at his doorstep along with a note that destabilizes him by exposing cruel truths about his selfish stance. What he could not foresee is that this seemingly simple choice would not only torment him with overwhelming guilt, but also trigger the revelation of dark secrets capable of transforming his life forever. Dawn in Madrid. The city lights flicker in the distance while a fine drizzle envelopes the deserted streets. An old wall clock strikes 2:34 a.m. inside a sophisticated private clinic. Dr. Alejandro Martin, with his impeccable posture and haughty demeanor, adjusts his tie in front of a mirror. Another long night shift has ended, dedicated exclusively to an elitist clientele willing to pay dearly to avoid waiting in line. As he organizes his documents, the sudden sound of the reception door being flung open catches his attention. A young woman enters, drenched from the rain, her eyes marked by despair. Her protruding belly reveals an advanced pregnancy. Stumbling, she reaches the counter and shouts, her voice heavy with anguish, "Please help me. I have nowhere to go. The baby is coming." Alejandro slowly raises his eyes. Unhurried, he walks toward her with a bored expression. Checking his watch, he responds in a cold, distant voice. "This clinic only serves scheduled patients or those with the necessary financial means. I suggest you seek a public hospital." The woman sobs, pleading, "I don't have any money. The hospital is far away, and I can't lose my baby." For a brief moment, Alejandro hesitates but soon regains his rigid posture, showing no emotion. He gestures to the security guard and orders, "Take her out. That's the most we can do." The woman's desperate screams are swallowed by the rain as she is forcibly removed. Alejandro returns to his desk, lets out a long sigh, and murmurs to himself, "I can't save the whole world." The next morning, as he steps out of his luxurious home in the Salamanca neighborhood to grab the newspaper, Alejandro comes across something unexpected on his doorstep. A wicker basket. Inside it is a newborn baby wrapped in a white blanket, whimpering softly. With trembling hands, he picks up a crumpled note from the tiny body. The words written on it seem to pierce his soul. "Now it is your responsibility. This child is the weight of your choice." Stunned, Alejandro looks around, but there is no one. Only the silence of the empty streets echoes as the words of the note resonate in his mind like an unbearable burden. Alejandro stands motionless on the threshold, his eyes fixed on the small being before him. The sound of the baby's cries echoes in his mind, intertwined with the words of the note like a silent accusation. He tries to rationalize. "This must be some kind of misunderstanding," he murmurs, although the uncertainty in his own voice betrays him. With hesitant movements, he picks up the basket and carries it inside. The contrast between the meticulously decorated room, a modern, cold, and immaculate space, and the warm presence of the baby disorients him. He places the basket on the sofa and sits in front of it, watching the newborn wave its arms in search of comfort. The incessant crying brings a strange pang to his chest, a feeling he cannot define. Picking up the phone, he begins to dial the police but stops midway. A thought flashes through his mind like thunder. Just imagine, prestigious doctor involved in scandal with abandoned baby. I can't let my reputation be ruined. He abandons the call and takes a deep breath. With a resigned sigh, he heads to the kitchen, rummaging through the cabinets and the fridge. He finds milk and, with the help of a quick tutorial on his phone, improvises a baby bottle. He returns to the living room with the object in hand, feeling awkward and uncertain. The baby eagerly sucks the milk, gradually calming down. Alejandro watches, fascinated, until a thought strikes him. What if this baby is that young woman's child? The woman from the clinic. The memory of her pleading, desperate eyes invades his mind, and a mix of emotions consumes him. Guilt, fear, regret. Determined to understand what is happening, he rummages through the basket. He finds the blanket, the familiar note, and hidden among the folds of fabric, a golden pendant inscribed, "For my dear soul." He holds the object for a moment, feeling the symbolic weight it carries. This tells me nothing. Who would do something like this? Alejandro decides to take action. He arranges the baby in an improvised bed in the living room and puts on his jacket. He heads to the clinic where he accesses the security cameras. He reviews the footage from the previous night, watching the scene unfold like a punch in the memory. The young woman is being escorted out. The torrential rain around 3 a.m. shows a hooded figure appearing in the footage, holding something against their chest. The person leaves the basket in front of the clinic and quickly disappears before the camera captures any details. Alejandro furrows his brow, trying to identify the silhouette. It can't be her. Can it? The mystery begins to gnaw at his mind. Determined, he takes the car and drives to the neighborhood where the clinic is located, hoping to find clues or witnesses. The streets, covered by the drizzle from the previous night, seem to carry the weight of his memories. Arriving at a nearby square, he spots a group of homeless people gathered around an improvised fire. Alejandro hesitates but walks toward them, pulling a bill from his pocket as an incentive. Last night, did anyone see a pregnant woman or perhaps someone carrying a baby? A man with a gray beard and a suspicious look lifts his head, evaluating him. And why should I help? People like you never look at us unless you need something. The words hit Alejandro, but he maintains his composure. He folds the bill and extends it again. The man snorts and points to a nearby alley. I saw a young woman over there. She was crying and talking about choices. Alejandro follows the indication, but the alley is empty. Only the smell of garbage and footprints in the mud remain. He sighs, frustrated, and returns home. Upon entering, he finds the baby sleeping deeply. The silence in the room now feels suffocating. He picks up the note once more and rereads it as if trying to extract some answer from the words. Now you are responsible. This child is the weight of your choice. Sitting in an armchair, Alejandro leans back, feeling the weight of what he read fall upon him. For the first time in years, a real doubt creeps into his mind, questioning the man he has become and the choices he has made. In the stillness of the night, Dr. Alejandro Martin remains seated at the living room table, holding a note between his fingers. In the basket beside him, the baby sleeps, and the soft sounds of its breathing fill the room with a paradoxical sense of calm and tension. Time seems to flow aimlessly while Alejandro feels the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders, as if he has crossed an invisible and irreversible line. The vibrant sound of his cell phone on the table interrupts his thoughts. It's a message from Carmen Alvarez, the clinic director. Alejandro, rumors have emerged about a young woman last night. Is there something we need to discuss? The clinic's reputation is at stake. He glances at the baby and, without responding, turns off the device. Reputation, not always, he mutters. What have I become? Just that cold, calculating, indifferent. Insistent thoughts attempt to dominate him, but soon an old memory resurfaces like a ghost. A conversation with his father when Alejandro was still a medical student in medicine. My son, choices are inevitable, but remember every decision has a price, and you must be prepared to pay it. He shakes his head as if he could dispel the echo of those words. His eyes fall on the pendant he found in the basket. Carefully, he holds it, turning it between his fingers as he examines the inscription. This must be important. Who would use something like this? Restlessness takes hold of him. Determined, Alejandro decides to seek help. It's past 2 in the morning when he picks up the phone and calls Javier, an old friend and private detective. On the other end, a hoarse voice answers, weighed down by sleep. Alejandro, do you know what time it is? This better be good. I need a favor, Javier. It's something delicate. Delicate? That sounds expensive. Spit it out. Despite his hesitation, Alejandro describes the situation without going into details. He talks about the baby, the note, and the pendant. Javier listens attentively, curiosity evident in his tone. So, the great Dr. Martin found something he can't solve with money or an expensive scalpel. Interesting. I'm not in the mood for jokes, Javier. Are you going to help me or not? Send me a photo of the pendant. I'll see what I can find out. Quickly, Alejandro takes a picture of the object and sends the image. While he waits, he paces the room in anxious, constant movement. Finally, the phone rings back. It's a simple piece but seems to have been custom-made, probably acquired at a small jewelry store. I know someone who can trace it. Give me a few hours. After the call, Alejandro feels fatigue weighing on him, but his eyes find the baby again. He approaches the basket and observes the small, sleeping face. Every detail so fragile and perfect. Something inside him begins to awaken, a strange and unsettling feeling. Who are you, little one? And why do I feel like you are here for a reason? But there are no answers, only more questions. At dawn, Javier returns with information. I found the jewelry store. They remember selling the pendant to a woman a few months ago. It was a gift for her daughter. Do you have her name? Clara Ruiz. Young, just over 20. She lived in a small apartment near Gran Via. It seems she was having a hard time and was recently evicted. The name hits him like a bolt of lightning. Alejandro remembers Clara, a former patient from a public hospital where he briefly worked before becoming renowned. A shy young woman with large, hopeful eyes who sought help for a heart problem. He treated her and then forgot. It can't be her. Clara would never be in this situation. But the name and the pendant leave no room for doubt. A mix of guilt and determination begins to take hold of him. Without wasting time, he goes to the address, knowing it will likely be empty. There he finds an elderly neighbor who watches him with suspicion before speaking. The girl left weeks ago. She was sweet, but life was hard on her. I heard she was pregnant, but no one knew who the father was. These words hit Alejandro like a blow. He leaves the place absorbed in his thoughts. Back home, he stares at the still sleeping baby. For the first time, he feels he will have to confront more than just the mystery before him. To find the answers he seeks, he will have to face the man he has allowed himself to become. Evening arrives slowly, but the urgency within him grows. The baby's cry awakens, demanding attention and nourishment, forcing the doctor to confront a role he never imagined assuming. He feels awkward holding the little one in his arms, but the simple touch awakens something new and deep within him. The clock on the wall seems to speed up as he tries to connect the pieces of the puzzle he has uncovered. The words of the note echo in his mind, and the memory of the young woman he met years ago haunts him. He begins to realize that his decision, or the absence of one, contributed to the current chaos in the clinic. The tension is palpable. The silence surrounding the case begins to give way to murmurs and curious glances. Some colleagues notice his reserved behavior while Carmen, the director, presses with pointed messages at intense meetings. Are you hiding something from me? He dodges the questions but feels the guilt swell like an unbearable weight. At night, on his way home, he holds the pendant once again. The object seems to carry memories and an uncertain future. Following an almost irrational instinct, he decides to visit the public hospital where he believes Clara sought help before disappearing. Upon arriving, he feels out of place. The cold environment, with peeling walls and crowded corridors, contrasts brutally with the luxury of the clinic where he now works. Recognized by the staff, he is greeted with formality, but this only increases his discomfort. "Did she come through here recently?" he asks a nurse who had worked with him in the past. Her hesitation is evident, but her look confirms it. After a sigh, she reveals, "The pregnant young woman appeared weeks before, desperate for care but was turned away for not being able to pay, even for the medications." Each word hits the doctor like a blow. He thanks her and leaves the hospital, but guilt follows him like a shadow. In the car, with the baby now silent beside him, he stops halfway and stares into the rearview mirror. The innocent face of the little one looks back at him, oblivious to the turmoil of emotions. "I need to fix this," he murmurs, his voice heavy with uncertainty. Night falls, bringing more questions than answers. The baby, now calmer, makes soft sounds that fill the silence of the house while he examines the note for the 1,000th time, searching for a hidden meaning. His thoughts are interrupted by a sound at the door. With his heart racing, he gets up and finds an envelope taped shut. He looks out the window, but the streets are empty. Inside the envelope, there is another note. "Have you started to see? The past cannot be erased, but perhaps there is still a chance for redemption." Accompanying the message is an old, worn photograph of Clara. She smiles while holding her belly, but her eyes betray a deep sadness. He closes his eyes, feeling the weight of guilt crush him in a way he has never felt before. It is clear that someone knows the truth. Someone is watching him, demanding that he confront the mistakes of the past. He picks up the phone and calls the detective, this time revealing more details. The notes, the photo, and what he knows so far. On the other end of the line, the response is firm. "Someone wants you to remember." But the question is, are you ready to discover what that really means? The question echoes like a challenge. Storing the note and the photo in a drawer, he tries to compose himself, but the image of Clara won't leave him. Determined, he returns to the neighborhood where she lived, intent on finding answers and perhaps a way to make amends. In the alley, where the neighbor had mentioned seeing her last, he surveys the surroundings. He notices recent marks on the ground, perhaps from a stroller or something being dragged. The clues are vague, but they lead him to an abandoned building where the silence is almost oppressive. Inside, he finds signs that someone had been there. An old blanket, a plastic cup, remnants of food. However, there is no sign of Clara. He walks through the rooms, his heart racing, until he hears a low noise, a meow in the corner of a room. A scruffy cat emerges from a blanket. He moves it aside and finds something that makes his stomach churn. Another note. "You have been blind by choice. See before it is too late." The warning is clear, but the riddle continues. Exiting the building, he feels the cold night air against his face and realizes he is being watched. Turning around, he sees a silhouette disappear around the corner. He runs, but when he reaches the spot, there is no one there, just the echo of distant footsteps. Back in the car, he grips the steering wheel tightly, trying to process everything. But one thing is certain: whoever is behind this knows much more about him than he would like. The drive home feels endless. The streets of Madrid, usually vibrant and full of life, now seem empty and oppressive. The baby sleeps in the back seat, oblivious to the storm brewing in the mind of the one carrying him. Upon arriving, the house seems even colder. He places the child in the makeshift crib. He hastily sets up and sits at the table, with the notes, the photo of Clara, and the pendant spread out before him. It is like a puzzle whose picture he still cannot see. The clock on the wall reads 3 a.m. when the phone rings. He answers instinctively. The voice on the other end is deep and familiar. You still don't understand, do you? The weight you have ignored for so long is chasing you now. It is your turn to feel. The call drops before he can react. He screams into the emptiness of the room, tension finally escaping in a fit of rage, but his voice echoes back without a response. The next morning, exhausted, he decides to take action. He returns to the clinic, determined to scour the old patient records for any clue about Clara. Upon entering his office, the director is waiting. "We need to talk. Your absence in recent days, the questions, the rumors. What is happening?" He dodges with an excuse, but it is evident that control over his life is slipping away. Locked in his office, he dives into the files until he finds her name, Clara Ruiz. Her file is a reflection of the struggles she faced. Appointments canceled for lack of payment, neglected treatments, and finally a transfer to a smaller hospital. Every detail is a silent accusation against him. He finds a final note: patient transferred after failing to receive assistance. Condition critical. The feeling of guilt hits him like an avalanche. He lets the papers fall and stares at his reflection in the glass of the window. The man he sees there is not the brilliant doctor everyone respects, but someone who turned his back on a life that depended on him. Back at home, he finds another surprise. The baby is restless, crying loudly, and on the table, there is another note written in the same handwriting. "You can still change. The decision is in your hands. Don't ignore it again." The presence of the note feels like a punch. Someone has been inside the house. He checks the doors and windows, but everything is locked. What disturbs him the most, however, is the tone of the note. For the first time, it seems to be not just an accusation but an opportunity. The baby's cries bring him back to the present. He picks the baby up in his arms, trying to soothe it, and for the first time, feels something different. A protective instinct, a desire to do something right even without knowing exactly how. But he knows he needs to start somewhere, perhaps by facing the truths he buried so long ago. The next dawn, he feels a renewed strength. For the first time, he decides to stop running and dive deep into the mysteries that surround him. With the baby safe in the crib, he gathers the notes in the photo, determined to find answers. There is something driving him, something that mixes guilt, curiosity, and an almost desperate need for redemption. The first destination is the smaller hospital mentioned in Clara's record. The place, modestly equipped, lacks the shine of the clinic where he works but carries an atmosphere of humanity that he had long forgotten. He asks about the young woman, describes the case, and waits while a nurse rummages through old records. After a few minutes, she returns with a look of sorrow. "She was here. Yes, she went through very difficult times. We didn't have the resources she needed, and with the baby almost term, it was clear her condition was deteriorating." "And where did she go after that?" he asks, trying to control his anxiety. "Transferred to a temporary shelter. We didn't know if she would survive the delivery. It was one of the saddest situations I've ever seen." The words hit him like a blow. He feels he is following the trail of someone who has always been on the margins, struggling to survive in a system he helped to build. A system that failed. In the shelter, the reality is even harsher. A small building hidden in a forgotten neighborhood of the city, where hope seems to survive only out of stubbornness. He shows Clara's photo and asks about her. An older woman with tired eyes stares at him for a few moments before responding. "I remember her. Clara was one of the saddest stories that came through here. She arrived exhausted, carrying more pain than she should have. She was so weak. We didn't have time to help her as she deserved." "And what happened afterwards?" he asks, his voice trembling. The woman sighs. "The delivery was difficult, and she didn't survive. The world seems to stop. The sound around him fades away, and all that remains is the pain of a truth he feared to face. Clara is dead, "And the baby?" he asks. "The baby was taken by someone. A man said he was a distant relative, but we were never able to confirm. The truth is that no one cared to check. You know, she was all alone in the world." Back in the car, his head spins with the revelations. He now understands that the baby in his home is the last link to Clara, a living reminder of his choices and omissions. The note, the messages, everything seems to point to one thing. He was placed in this position to fix what he destroyed. But there are still questions. Who is leaving the notes? Who brought the baby to him? Suddenly, he feels that he is being watched again. In the rearview mirror, he notices a car parked across the street with tinted windows. When he looks directly, the vehicle accelerates and disappears around the corner. Once again, the mystery envelopes him. There is something larger happening, something he still cannot understand. He returns home with the weight of guilt heavier than ever, but with a new purpose. Clara may be dead, but the baby is still alive. He promises himself that he will do everything in his power to correct the mistakes of the past. Meanwhile, in his pocket, the last note still feels warm in his hands. Don't ignore it again. Back at his house, the baby sleeps peacefully in the makeshift crib, oblivious to the storm going on around him. The doctor sits down at the table once more, with the notes spread out before him. Clara's image is etched in his mind, but the idea that someone is watching and manipulating events makes him uneasy. Suddenly, the phone rings. He answers without hesitation. "I hope you're understanding the message." The voice is the same as the previous call, cold and firm. He tries to interrupt, but the voice continues. "You were responsible for her downfall. Now you have an opportunity to do something different. But it takes courage to face the truths you buried for so long. Who are you? Why are you doing this?" He shouts, but the call is cut off once again. Frustrated, he puts the phone down and stares into the emptiness of the room. He knows the voice is right. To move forward, he needs to revisit the past he tried so hard to forget. Determined, he rummages through his old files. After hours, he finds a dusty folder marked with a simple, "Transferred cases." There are files of patients he briefly attended to and then discarded. Clara is among them. As he reads the form again, he notices something he had ignored before. A detail in the consent signature. The signature belonged to a man, someone who introduced himself as responsible for Clara. In one of the documents, the handwriting is firm and authoritative, contrasting with her fragility. He had never noticed this before. The question now echoes in his mind. Who was this man? He decides to revisit the public hospital where Clara was treated for the last time. While talking to one of the older nurses, he obtains a valuable clue. "Yes, I remember him. He was an older man, well-dressed. He said he was a relative of hers, but there was something about him that bothered me, like he was more interested in controlling Clara than helping her." "Do you remember his name?" The nurse hesitates but then mentions a surname that makes his heart race. Ruiz. It was a common surname, but the way it was pronounced brought forth old memories of a former benefactor of the clinic where he had worked. Before he leaves the hospital, he finds more questions than answers, but now he is determined to find this man. Back at his home, while reviewing his notes, he hears a noise coming from outside. When he opens the door, he finds another envelope stuck there. Inside, there is only one sentence. "You know where to look." This time, he doesn't feel fear. Instead, a cold determination takes hold of him. He realizes he can no longer hide from the truth. If this man is behind it all, then he needs to confront him. The baby, now awake, watches him from the crib. He approaches and gently strokes the child's head. For the first time, he feels something beyond guilt, a real connection. "I will take care of you, no matter the cost." With that, he grabs the car keys and leaves, determined to follow the lead to the end. The doctor drives through the streets of Madrid, tracing the trail of a name that won't leave his mind. The surname Ruiz, associated with the man who introduced himself as responsible for Clara, leads him to an old mansion on the outskirts of the city. He vaguely remembers the place, a discreet yet imposing property belonging to a family known for their influence in the medical field. Upon arrival, he stops the car in front of the iron gate and observes the building from a distance. The mansion, surrounded by tall trees, seems to hold secrets within its ancient walls. He hesitates before stepping down, but something inside him pushes him forward. He presses the intercom, and a gravelly voice responds, "Who's there? I need to speak with whoever lives here. It's about Clara Ruiz." The silence on the other side is heavy. Finally, the gate creaks open slowly. Inside, he is greeted by an older man with a rigid posture and piercing gaze. He recognizes the face immediately, an old donor from the clinic where he had worked years ago. The connection to Clara, once obscure, now becomes crystal clear. "So you were responsible for her," he accuses bluntly. The man, with disconcerting calmness, gestures for him to enter. Seated in a spacious room decorated with ancient artworks, the host finally speaks. "Clara was my niece, the last link remaining of a shattered family. But as you know, she always was weak, unable to follow the rules of the world." The coldness in his words irritates him, but he holds back. "She needed help and you abandoned her," he says, trying to maintain control. The man smirks sarcastically. "I did more for her than anyone else would have. I offered her a roof, food, a chance. But Clara chose the harder path. She preferred to give in to emotions, to weaknesses like this unwanted pregnancy. Did you know about this baby? Did you know she was dying?" The man stands up, anger beginning to seep into his voice. "She made her choices and you, doctor, made yours. You both left her to fend for herself. Now you come here to accuse me? Hypocrisy." The words hit him like a slap. He realizes that the man feels no remorse, only a bitter indifference to Clara's fate. "And who brought the baby to me? Was it you?" The man smiles again, this time with something darker in his eyes. "Do you think you have all the answers? Perhaps you should ask yourself why someone like you, so used to ignoring the needy, was chosen to carry this weight." The doctor abruptly stands up, blood boiling. He stares at the man but realizes he won't get anything more from him. Before leaving, however, he makes a promise. "This baby will not suffer the same fate as Clara. I will ensure that, even if it destroys me." The man merely watches as he departs, wearing a slight, disdainful smile. Back in the car, he realizes that even though he has faced the past, the answers are still incomplete. The connection between the notes, the delivery of the baby, and everything that has happened still confuses him. But one thing is clear: he can no longer hide from his responsibility. Night falls heavily as he returns home. The baby, who had been sleeping soundly in the back seat, lets out soft murmurs. As he cradles the child, he feels something different. A bond that has begun to grow, a sincere desire to care for and protect. Inside the house, he finds another surprise. The most recent note is on the table despite having left the door locked. He opens it with trembling hands, already familiar with the handwriting. The last piece is near. "Are you ready to see who you really are?" The riddle consumes him. Each note seems to draw him deeper into a journey of guilt and regret. He decides he needs to find out who is behind this, even if it confronts him with even more painful truths. In the early hours of the morning, he calls the detective again, recounting everything that happened at the mansion. "I think the man is connected to the notes, but he's too cold. He's not the type to leave a child on my doorstep, nor would he write something so emotional." On the other end of the line, the response is dry. Then look for another suspect, someone who knew Clara, someone who had a reason to want justice. The silence in the room is filled with the soft sounds of the baby, who now seems calmer in his presence. He picks up the pendant again, turning it over in his hands. The inscription, "For my dear soul," seems to shine differently. He feels that there is something he is ignoring. Suddenly, a memory strikes him. Clara. Years ago, when he briefly treated her at the public hospital, she mentioned someone. A close friend, almost like a sister. He didn't pay attention at the time, but now he remembers a name. Laura. The next morning, he finds Laura working at a small restaurant downtown. Her face is marked by time and the harshness of life. Upon seeing him, her eyes fill with anger. "Do you have the nerve to show up here after what you did?" He tries to explain, but she interrupts him, her voice heavy with pain. "Clara trusted you. She believed you could help her, but you turned your back on her like everyone else. And now you are here pretending to care. I didn't know. I was selfish, but I didn't know she was so bad." She stares at him for a long moment before stepping closer. "Do you have any idea what she went through? She lost everything. Her health, her hope, and when she needed it most, no one was there for her. I watched her wither away, saw her strength disappear, and you, who had the power to do something, did nothing." He feels the guilt rising to the surface again, but this time he decides not to hide. "I know I failed. I know Clara deserved more, but now her baby is with me. I'm trying to make this right." Laura lets out a bitter laugh. "Make it right? Do you think taking care of the baby will erase everything? Nothing can bring Clara back." He watches her, realizing that behind the anger there is immense pain. "Please tell me, do you know who is leaving the notes? Who brought the baby to me?" Laura hesitates before answering. "I don't know who it was, but Clara told me one thing before she died. They need to feel. They need to understand what it is to lose something that matters. Maybe that's what is happening to you now." The words hit him like a final blow. He realizes that more than discovering who is behind the notes, he needs to accept that he is being forced to face the weight of his choices. Back home, he finds the baby crying. As he picks her up in his arms, he feels that connection again. An opportunity for redemption that he cannot ignore. "I will not fail you, not this time." The following days bring a new and unexpected routine. He learns to care for the baby, improvising between videos on the internet and hurried advice from familiar nurses. Every cry, every gesture from the child seems to be a constant reminder of his silent promise to Clara. But the feeling of being watched never leaves him. One night, while feeding the baby, the doorbell rings. He hesitates, his heart racing. When he opens the door, he finds an envelope attached to the doorknob. This time, he feels no anger, only resignation. The note inside the envelope is different. It doesn't contain riddles, but an address and a simple phrase. "It's time to face everything." The address is of an old church in a discreet neighborhood of Madrid. He knows the place, a location he visited a few times, always in search of answers during the hardest moments of his life. The next day, with the baby secure in a portable crib, he heads to the church. The space is empty except for a man kneeling in front of the altar. The figure, with gray hair and simple clothes, emanates an aura of serenity, but also something deeper, a sadness that seems to accompany him. The man turns upon noticing his presence. "I wondered when you would finally come." The doctor stares at him, confused. "Were you the one who left the notes?" The man shakes his head. "Not directly, but I did what was necessary to ensure you received the message." "Why? Who are you?" The man sighs before responding, "I am Clara's father." The world seems to spin around him as he tries to process the information. "I'm not a perfect man. I was absent for most of her life. When I finally returned, Clara was already destroyed by a system that did not see her, and you were one of the people who ignored her." The weight of the words falls like an avalanche. He tries to argue, but Clara's father raises his hand, asking for silence. "I am not here to accuse you, not anymore. I am here because my daughter believed in you. Even after everything, she said you could be better. That maybe if something big shook you, you could change." The doctor's eyes fill with tears. For the first time, he understands the true purpose of the notes, the baby, everything that happened. It was not just about Clara, but about who he had become over the years. Someone distant, cold, disconnected from the people he said he wanted to save. "And the baby?" he asks, his voice choked. "It was my last attempt to honor her memory. The child needed someone who could protect her, and Clara believed that person was you." The silence that follows is heavy with emotions. He realizes that the baby was not just a burden imposed on him, but a second chance. "I will not disappoint her," he promises Clara's father. The man simply nods before turning his attention back to the altar. Back at home, he looks at the baby once more. For the first time, he feels ready to take on the responsibility of being someone better, not out of guilt, but by choice. The following days bring a mix of serenity and determination. For the first time in years, he begins to question every choice he made, every life he touched, and every opportunity he let slip by. Taking care of the baby is not just a task. It is a symbol of something greater. He feels that he is finally trying to connect with what he lost throughout his career: humanity. That afternoon, while organizing the necessary documents to legalize the child's custody, he receives an unexpected call. "It's Laura. We need to talk. It's important." They meet in a nearby park, a quiet place where the presence of the wind and the birds seems to make everything lighter. Laura is serious, but there is something in her gaze that surprises him. It is no longer just anger. It is understanding. "I wanted to thank you," she begins, leaving him confused, "for taking care of the baby. It wasn't easy for me to accept this. I hated you. I thought you were the reason for everything that happened. But now I understand you were also a victim of a system that fails us all the time." He feels a weight being lifted from his shoulders but does not respond. She continues, "Clara knew you were capable of change. She always had that hope, even when no one else believed it. And I think that, in some way, she was right." He tries to hold back his emotion as Laura hands him a small envelope. "I found this among her things. I think you should have it." Inside the envelope is a letter written by Clara shortly before her passing. The words are simple but loaded with meaning. "If you are reading this, it's because there is still a chance. I don't want you to lose yourself forever. You have something inside you that the world needs. Just don't let fear and pride stop you from finding it." He closes his eyes, holding the letter as if it were the last connection to Clara. When he opens them, he finds Laura's gaze full of expectation. "So, I promise," he says firmly, as if he is speaking to both Laura and Clara. "I won't fail this time." The next morning, he enters the clinic for the first time with a different purpose. Calling Carmen, the director, for a meeting, he hands in his resignation letter. "I'm leaving this place. It's time for me to do something that really matters." She stares at him incredulously. "You're throwing away a career you built over years." "I'm not throwing it away. I'm finally building something real," he replies calmly before leaving without looking back. At home, he holds the baby in his arms, feeling lighter than ever. He knows the road will be tough, but now he is ready, not to erase the mistakes of the past, but to build something new. Months go by, and the transformation is evident. Far from the luxury clinic, he now works in a public hospital providing care to people he once ignored. The baby, who has become the light of his life, grows up healthy and loved. The routine is exhausting, but each day brings renewed purpose, something he never felt in his old life. On a sunny afternoon, while walking with the child in the park, he meets Laura again. She watches from afar as he plays with the little one, a soft smile appearing on her lips. As she approaches, they exchange a glance that says more than words. "He is well taken care of," she says, her voice catching. "Thank you for believing in me," he replies sincerely. She smiles, but before leaving, she leaves one last message. Clara would be proud. She always believed that people can change, even when no one else believes it. He watches as Laura walks away, feeling a mix of gratitude and longing. That night, as he puts the baby to sleep, he finds the last note he kept in a drawer. The phrase that once seemed like a riddle now makes perfect sense. You can still change. The decision is in your hands. He takes the note, the pendant, and the photo of Clara and puts them together in a small chest, not as a weight of the past, but as a reminder of everything he learned. He looks at the sleeping baby and whispers, "You changed my life. I promise I will be the best for you." The lights in the house go out, and a new day awaits. The past cannot be changed, but the future is full of possibilities. 2 years have passed since the day the baby arrived at his door, transforming his life forever. Time, which once felt suffocating, is now filled with moments of joy and learning. On the morning of the child's second birthday, the little one runs through the small, bright room holding a toy with enthusiasm. Laughter echoes through the space, bringing life to a place that once felt empty and cold. He watches the scene with a smile on his face as he organizes the final preparations for a small celebration. The bonds he has formed throughout this journey are deeper than he ever imagined. Laura is now a regular figure, visiting often and helping to care for the little one. She has become a friend and confidant, someone who encourages him to continue on the path he chose. In the public hospital where he works, the transformation is also visible. He has become not only a respected doctor, but also a mentor to young professionals, teaching them not only techniques, but the importance of seeing the human being behind each patient. As he blows out the candles on the cake with the baby, he feels complete, not for wealth, status, or recognition, but for the love he found in taking on the responsibility that at first felt like a burden. Laura approaches, holding a small box. He opens it and finds a special gift, a new pendant with the words, "Hope is reborn," engraved on it. She smiles and says, "This is to remind you to never forget what is possible when we choose to change." He holds the pendant close to his heart, moved. He now knows that the future will be challenging, but he is ready to face it. "Thank you," he replies, looking at her and the little one, feeling a happiness he has never known.